Before I introduce our first speaker, I want to take a moment to tell you a short story that is in some ways unremarkable, but also represents and introduces everything we're about to discuss this evening. On the night of the election, I went to bed not knowing for sure, but having a pretty good idea of what I would be waking up to. And when I did wake up a few hours later, I saw that a friend of mine had texted me at 3 a.m. saying, "I'm so stressed by this election, I can't sleep. How's your new job?" And when I saw that text, I knew those two things were directly related. We're all affected by the outcome of this election in different personal ways, but collectively we know that a Trump presidency poses a very large threat to the safety of our food, water, and climate. When my friend couldn't sleep because of these worries, his instinct was to reach out and to ask about Food and Water Watch. And in the following days, many of you have reached out to say thank you for your work, or sometimes just to say I'm scared, or I'm angry, and sometimes to ask, what can I do? Tonight, I'm going to introduce these topics as someone new to Food and Water Watch who went to work the next morning to see a flurry of activity. I saw in my new colleagues all the same emotions we all felt. I saw tears and anger, and I also saw compassion and grace and generosity and determination. Our Executive Director Wenonah Hauter reminded us to take care of ourselves. She said, take the time you need today, take the long weekend and rest and recharge, and come back Tuesday ready to fight. Our Managing Director of Policy and Litigation, Mitch Jones, reminded us that we also had some important wins to celebrate. And Tara Heinzen, our legal director, promised us we'd sue the hell out of Trump. These are the people I'm honored to be working alongside, and these are the people I'm honored to be introducing you to this evening. And I want to say that I'm feeling so thankful in a time like this that my day-to-day work is being here with all of you, fighting for a livable future for all. Wenonah, if you'd like to join us. Hi
Good
there.
evening.
Thank you so much for being here. Thanks for taking the time to be here with us, and welcome to tonight's Livable Future Live.
Good evening, and thank you so much for joining us this evening. I know that the shocking and horrifying outcome of the election has impacted each and every one of us personally. There's no denying what we're in for because we've seen a Trump presidency before, with all branches of the federal government controlled in for the fight of our lives. I know that many of us are still processing what it means for people, our environment, our country, and ourselves. We fear for the future and dread the loss of civil and human rights. We're alarmed by how the Trump presidency and the trifecta in Congress will endanger justice and equality. We dread the impact on marginalized people and frontline communities. We're worried about the loss of democracy and this dismantling of agencies and institutions that we depend upon for the stability of our society. We're worried about our climate and the effects of the Trump administration and how it's going to impact our water and food. It is not a surprise that many of us are still experiencing a deep collective political grief that is painful and disorienting. We usually associate grief with death, but grieving is about loss. And rather than the positive agenda we've all been working for and looking forward to, we are facing years of chaos, corruption, and cronyism. I've been reading and thinking a lot about grief and the dread that many of us feel. The Rolling Stone had a good article called "That Sinking Feeling in Your Stomach." That's political grief. I'm sure not a psychologist, but a lot of what psychologists are saying, it's just common sense. It's okay to feel really bad, and there isn't a timeline for grief. Self-care is important. And it's good to remember that there are literally millions and millions of people who are suffering from the same feelings of despair right now. And one of the things that's really made me feel better is all of the wonderful messages from our members and supporters. And I know that talking with like-minded people is one of the best ways to shake this sadness and depression. We will get through the next 4 years by supporting one another. Engaging with the community, whether it's online or where you live, is one of the best antidotes to political grief. Each of us still has agency, and we need to remember we are not powerless, and we can take our power back. We can turn fear and anger into action, and this is going to be key to turning back the Trump wish list. Let's turn our fury into working step by step to stop his ugly agenda. We must remember that Trump and his cronies can't just walk into office and achieve their goals overnight. One of our first opportunities we have is weighing in on the reckless candidates that have been nominated for the cabinet and agency positions. The lack of a vetting process and the unsuitability of the candidates will be an opportunity to slow things down and obstruct the confirmation process. There are going to be a lot of opportunities to not simply just protest, but to build opposition to the irresponsible and dangerous Trump proposals. It's going to be really important to have a coordinated effort to stop as much as we can. We will need your help to resist all attempts by Trump and his allies to undermine the key protections for our food, water, climate, and people at the federal level. We will continue pursuing progressive policy gains at the state level, from New York to California and in dozens of states in between. We will work with you to ensure that progress continues to be made, moving our country off of fossil fuels and onto clean, renewable energy with safe, affordable food and water for all. Regardless of what Trump and his cronies think they can get away with, we'll fight back. There will be many, many ways for you to engage and be part of our community. We will have regular events and webinars. We will continue to have organizers on the ground at many locations. And there are so many ways that you can get involved in a meaningful way. Central to our strategy is exponentially growing our volunteer program and expanding the leadership of volunteers. Food and water action volunteers are making a real impact and have had so many great successes. To win the change we need, we must engage tens of thousands of people in fighting for it. I still have tremendous hope for the future. And in 2 years, just in time for the midterm elections, Trump's going to be a lame duck president. Many people who voted for Trump will be unimpressed and angry about what's happened. So it's okay to feel despondent and disappointed for a little bit. But I know we can turn things around if we support one another, stay strong and focused. And I look forward to being in this fight with you. Onward together.
Engaging with community is a good antidote to political grief. What a good reminder of the importance and the power of coming together in community, both to care for one another and to take action. Thank you for your words, Wenonah. Next, I'd like to introduce Mitch Jones. Mitch is Food and Water Watch's Managing Director of Policy and Litigation. Mitch, thank you so much for being here.
I'm happy to be here, Janine.
Mitch, as we've been saying, we've experienced a big loss with this election, and I think you'll talk about that. But one of the things you pointed out right away, the day after the election, was that we also had some big wins. Could you walk us through some highlights and lowlights of the election results and what they all mean for a path forward?
Well, I think we all know the lowlights. Obviously, Trump getting elected is not the outcome any of us wanted, and it's going to make our work more difficult. But as you and Wenonah have both highlighted, we have spaces to move forward. And I think that's a really important message to keep in mind. We're going to sue the hell out of Trump, and we're going to win at the state and local level to make advances. Obviously, the initial results looked to be much worse than they currently are. As votes continue to be counted, especially in California and elsewhere, it looks like the Republicans may have lost a seat or two in the House, so their already small, chaotic House majority will be even smaller and more chaotic. While obviously the Republicans won the Senate, the initial suggestion that Trump won a majority popular vote isn't going to end up being true. The votes are all going the other direction now, and his vote total is below 50%. So I think we need to put a certain amount of perspective on what happened. Obviously, we are all deeply disappointed by the outcome of the election. But as Wenonah mentioned, we've been here before. We've dealt with this before, and we know how to win in these situations. Somebody asked me the other day, oh, when's the last time somebody had a trifecta in the House, or a trifecta with the House, Senate, and the presidency? And I reminded them, one, Biden had one, but also two, Trump had one. And we were able to get some victories and stop some horrible things from happening. And you mentioned, Janine, some of the positive outcomes. There's a new congressman-elect from upstate New York, Josh Riley, who flipped a Republican seat back to the Democrats. We've spoken with him multiple times. He's a great candidate who agrees with us on our issues across the board, and I think he's going to be a really positive addition to the Congress. Laura Gillen, New York 4, Long Island, flipped a seat. She's going to be really good. Chris DeLuzio, congressman from southwestern Pennsylvania, got reelected. He's been a good ally of ours in fighting against corporate power. And we're still waiting for a few results from out west, but it's looking like we're going to have some good allies in this Congress, including people who have been there for a long time, like Jan Schakowsky and Ro Khanna. And if you've joined us for previous webinars, you've heard from them before. So there were some positive things in the election. I don't want to sugarcoat it. I am not the person who ever sugarcoats anything. But that's where we are at the moment. Now, one thing I want to mention, because we still have the current Congress, they're back and they're going to try to pass bills. There's one right now that we want people to take action on, and hopefully we're queued up to put this in the chat. It's called, it's HR 9495, and the bill actually is targeting organizations like ours. It would give the Secretary of the Treasury basically unilateral power to strip nonprofits of their nonprofit status. And this is something that is aimed straight at the heart of organizations like Food and Water Watch. And it's something that we need to stop. So we do have an action you can take right now to tell Congress to defeat this bill. It already failed on the House floor once. They've revived it. It's coming back tomorrow. And we need to stop it. We need to kill it either tomorrow or we need to kill it in the Senate. So please take that action, because there are, as Wenonah said, we can, if we act together, we can still win in these situations. This particular bill, we need to kill it this week. It needs to be done. So it's HR 9495. And like I said, there's an action being put into the chat where you can just click and take that action to beat that bill. It's really important that we do this. And this will also help demonstrate that we can still get victories. We're all deeply disappointed in the outcome of the election, but we still have hope. We still know that when we work together, we can win, because we did it the last time Trump was president, and we're going to do it this time. And I'm looking forward to hearing my colleagues Tara and Jorge talk more about how we're going to do that on the legal and organizing front in the coming years.
Thank you, Mitch. Yeah, we're in it for a long fight. And I think I do want to mention one action you can take now is supporting the work that we do. Everything we're doing takes resources. If you'd like to increase the impact we can have, consider making a donation or becoming a Food and Water Watch member. That really helps us sustain these long-term fights. And we don't take any corporate funding, so we aren't beholden to any special interests other than the health of our communities and our planet. So thank you for your support. We're grateful for that. Thank you, Mitch. We will put that link for donation as well in the chat. And Mitch will be coming back here in a little bit for questions. So if you have questions for Mitch, feel free to put them in the Q&A box now. But next, I would like to introduce our legal director, Tara Heinzen. Tara, if you can turn your video on, we'll get you spotlighted. Hi. This is Tara. Tara, I've talked to you a couple of times about what our legal team does here at Food and Water Watch. And you reminded me that the legal team has had wins under a Trump presidency before. Could you go over the role of the legal team at Food and Water Watch? What do we foresee and what are we prepared to do in a Trump presidency?
Yes, absolutely. Thanks, Janine. And thanks everyone for making the time to be here tonight. I am Food and Water Watch's legal director. I oversee our team of 5 attorneys and the work that we do to help advance Food and Water Watch's campaigns and our mission. And that really looks like a very broad mix of work. We support our on-the-ground organizing campaigns through legal tactics and legal research. But we also work all the way on the other end of the spectrum, engaging in really high impact, often national scope litigation to advance our priority campaigns at the federal and state levels. So we are often suing the government. We play a really major role in the organization's work to fight federal rollbacks of our bedrock protections for our food, water, and climate, because those rollbacks happen when federal agencies pass regulations or eliminate regulations, and those actions can be challenged in court. So I expect that that will be a huge part of our team's work in the years ahead. Or as others have put it, we will sue the hell out of Trump. I can't say I'm looking forward to it, but we've been here before and we are ready to do it again. So I'm just going to talk for a few minutes about, what we're in for on the legal front, what it's going to look like to tackle these deregulatory agencies head on in the courts. Like Wenonah said, we've been through this before. We generally do know what to expect, but the landscape is going to be a little bit different this time around. And I'll go through just a few ways that we expect things to be a little bit different. First, unfortunately, this Trump administration is going to be a lot more organized than the 2017 administration. They really weren't expecting to win last time around. They did a lot of bungling. They made a lot of mistakes. This time, obviously, they have not just a plan to win, but they have Project 2025 and a roadmap for all of the terrible actions that they plan to take. So they will hit the ground running. But second, some interesting dynamics actually have weakened federal agency authority, and we will do everything we can to exploit that. So specifically, the Supreme Court last year has really gone on a rampage attacking agency authority at the federal level, and there was a case last year where the Supreme Court eliminated what has been called Chevron deference. It was on the books for 40 years, and that basically was a doctrine that said that courts should give federal agencies deference, kind of the benefit of the doubt when they are using their expertise to interpret statutes, like our bedrock environmental laws, like the Clean Water Act. That deference is gone. So now when we sue federal agencies over their actions, if we have the stronger argument, we win. No more deference to the agencies. The tie doesn't go to them anymore. And we still have some very strong bedrock laws to work with. So this should mean that, at least in some cases, it will be harder for agencies to roll back protections. Another thing that is going to be, I think, really important to these dynamics is that Trump and his cabinet picks want to gut the government itself. They want to destroy these agencies. They don't just want to roll back regulations. They want to cut their budgets. They want to impose hiring freezes. That is going to mean a lot of loss of expertise of career staff in these agencies, scientists and regulators. That means a loss of just human bodies, human power needed to get these things done in this bureaucratic system. So these strategies of gutting the government while at the same time trying to finalize a ton of regulatory actions could end up playing against each other. It's tragic for civil society to have this expected loss from all of our federal agencies, but it could throw some sand in the gears of the deregulatory efforts of this administration. And third, we have to face that the courts themselves look very different than they did 8 years ago. In his first administration, Trump appointed more than 230 federal judges to lifetime appointments on the court. A lot of them are younger than I am. So we're going to be dealing with those terrible right-wing judges for a very long time. And of course, now there will be 4 more years for him to do that all over again. So we expect to see a wave of retirements from the federal courts, probably 2 retirements from the Supreme Court, and Trump will be rushing to fill those with Federalist Society right-wing judges. But we have to remember that Biden just had 4 years to do the same thing with reasonable and often very progressive and far more diverse judges to the bench. So Biden has appointed over 200 federal judges, and the Senate is racing to fill every remaining vacancy before the transition. Actually, they're doing that right now as we speak. So hopefully this transition will happen without a single federal court vacancy and as many, reasonable, good judges on the bench as possible, so that we can continue to work as we have to in the federal arena and in the federal courts. We really can't just cede the federal courts or shift all of our work to the states, even recognizing that we will be looking to the states for key opportunities, not just to maintain the status quo, but to make real progress. And then I'll just kind of wrap up by discussing a little bit of how we will move forward on the federal level, not just by suing the hell out of Trump, but trying to move some things forward. Of course, we will be focusing heavily on fighting deregulation and maintaining existing protections, but we will be looking for and exploiting all opportunities for progress. It's important to know that under our environmental laws, not everything these agencies want to do is optional. There are rules that EPA and other agencies have to finalize. There are decisions they have to make every year or every 2 years. So there are going to be ways that we can still force action and challenge inadequate actions and challenge failures to act. That's very similar to what we're doing under the Biden administration. we can also find ways to lay the groundwork for real progress in the future on the legal and regulatory landscape. So for example, in 2017, we filed a detailed legal petition to the Environmental Protection Agency, asking it to strengthen its regulation of factory farm water pollution under the Clean Water Act. We didn't think that the Trump administration was going to pick up that petition and act on it. We didn't want them anywhere near that, frankly. We wanted to get it into the pipeline so that we could pick it up under a more favorable administration. And that's exactly what we did. We bided our time. In 2022, we were able to sue EPA to demand an answer to that petition. And subsequent litigation has resulted in compelling EPA to create multiple study processes about factory farm water pollution that are going to set us up for future success. We're going to be doing similar things under this administration. And in fact, we're going to be filing a strategic legal action just next week related to plastics pollution and the harms of plastics on public health. That's going to be going to the federal EPA, and we are going to want widespread public support for that. So please be on the lookout for an action alert and information about that action when we can share more. I'll pass it back to Jean.
Thank you, Tara. I know we have a lot of questions coming in. If you have questions for Tara about our legal work, please go ahead and put them in the Q&A box. We have one more speaker, and then we'll break for our first Q&A session. So with that, let me introduce you to our next speaker, Jorge Aguilar, Food and Water Watch's Southern Region Director. Jorge, thank you for being here. Could you describe the work that you do with Food and Water Watch? What will your team be doing next? And how can people listening get involved with that work?
Yes, of course. Thanks, Janine. Hi, friends. Yeah, it's so wonderful to be here with you tonight. As Wenonah said at the start of this call, this is the time to check in with our friends and our friend circles and all the networks we built, just to give a second to really acknowledge the fears we have and the challenges ahead. So I'm so glad that so many of you have joined us tonight. Again, for those of you that don't know me, I am Jorge Aguilar. I oversee our state and local organizing work in the Southeast region. I'm originally from Miami, and my family is an immigrant family that moved to the States almost 4 decades ago, like many others, in hopes of achieving the American dream. So like many of you, I'm also grieving the consequences this election will have on our water, our food, and our climate, all those things that we're trying to protect, but also really scared for the much larger threats beyond those things Food and Water Watch directly works on that are equally as important, like healthcare and civil rights and economic justice and so many other things. I started to work on water issues myself many years ago because I had family members of mine who did not always have access to clean water. And I was outraged by the fact that more and more Americans today do not have access to this fundamental human right. So I felt the need to jump into advocacy, like many of you in the past and many who are now coming to fight against this new administration. Today, I'm driven still by the fact that in South Florida, anyone, not just my family who lives there, can see the regular threats of storms fueled by climate change and sunny day flooding. So yes, the challenges today are very, very real. But I've been taking real inspiration and fortitude in the last 2 weeks post-election from just touching base with the magnificent volunteers and concerned residents like you on this call who are working on what to do next. In all the conversations I've had so far, I hear a lot of how could this have happened? This is a looming disaster. I went through this 8 years ago, and I don't think I can fight back this time. And after that very real conversation, there's always this moment, a bit of a silver lining, where the person I'm talking to identifies the one small thing they're going to do next. And that's really all we can ask for at this moment. It's what is the small next thing that we all can do? And so I'm going to chat a little bit with you here tonight on what we're up to here at Food and Water Watch to help you really think through those small things you may be able to do next. Our organizing team's focus is always to build on-the-ground networks at the local and state level to move clear victories that improve people's lives. We truly believe that a dedicated team of individuals that educates and engages elected officials can achieve significant successes if we are disciplined and strategic in how we mobilize ourselves. And as Mitch and Tara have already laid out, we're going to be in defense mode at the federal level for the next couple of years, but I'm happy to report that our organizing team has been doing an assessment of our state and local work and feel the deep relationships we built locally with our volunteer network and other organizational allies is strong. And we are really in a good position to double down to get big victories in several states, like we did during the last Trump presidency. So I wanted to share a few of those projects that Food and Water Watch is continuing to work on at the state and local level. And give me a second as I look through my notes here at the long list of things, and again, trying to highlight a few of them for you. As many of you know, in New York, for instance, Food and Water Watch was one of the leaders in banning unconventional fracking methods. But there's a new threat that has reared its ugly head recently because of a greenwashing scheme called carbon capture. This is a failed technique to collect carbon dioxide that big oil is selling the public so they can get hundreds of millions of dollars in taxpayer subsidies. Well, there's a plan now in New York to potentially open up fracking with carbon dioxide. And we are moving to ban that from ever happening in New York. Simultaneously to that effort in New York, as a way of really going on the offensive, our Food and Water Watch New York team, along with many other groups, is also trying to ensure Governor Hochul to sign a bill that would require the oil and gas companies contribute $3 billion to the state for the climate change devastation they have unleashed. The General Assembly has actually already passed this bill that would see climate resiliency programs funded across the state with this money. And we just need Governor Hochul now, who's not been supportive so far. We just need Governor Hochul to sign it. And so that is what we're working on in New York right now. I think we're going to add some links to that on the chat so you can read about it. In Pennsylvania, which has been ground zero for fracking and its havoc, our team is continuing our work to zone out fracking and the build out of other petrochemical industries, city by city, town by town. In fact, our team has worked on passing 36 of these local ordinances in municipalities in Allegheny County alone, and that's in Western Maryland. And that's going to be important. Just today, for instance, Governor Shapiro announced plans to approve more fossil fuel projects. So that is just a good reminder of how important it is to do all this work at the local level to protect communities. And we're going to be there on the ground in Pennsylvania to do that. Let's see, in Maryland and New Jersey and California, where we have Democratic governors with a trifecta who could meet this moment and plan more ambitious goals on climate, on a lot of other issues, given the situation nationally that we're heading into next year. In those three states, we have robust state staff campaigns that are pushing for more aggressive clean energy programs that will help transition off fossil fuels and incentivize the build out of more wind and solar via really advocacy for state legislation. And that's just state legislative stuff. In places like California, we are continuing to fight to shut down the Southern California Gas Company's methane gas compressor station that is near an elementary school in an environmental justice community in Ventura, California. Our team is really pressuring Governor Newsom to shut that down, to shut that down and shut down the massive Aliso Canyon gas storage facility that continues to leak methane and endanger nearby communities. And it's being run by the same company, SoCal Gas. Food and Water Watch actually just released an ad calling on Governor Newsom to fulfill his promise to shut down that facility in Aliso Canyon, which he is now dragging his feet on. So we're actually going to share a link to an action on that, and an ad to that Food and Water Watch also just ran for you to check that out. So the list is long because Food and Water Watch's volunteers are passionate and dedicated and are always engaging with the staff on new campaign efforts. As part of these efforts on fossil fuel projects, and the ones we're trying to stop from coming online, we're also fighting the Maple pipeline expansion in the Northeast, the Iroquois pipeline expansion in New York, the Gibbstown liquefied natural gas export facility in New Jersey, and the Passaic Valley Sewerage Commission power plant in Newark, in the Newark Ironbound community. And that's just our climate work. I've listed a bunch of things, but it's not just climate, right? As part of our work to protect our food and create sustainable food systems, we are continuing to work in Oregon to pass a moratorium on factory farms in a groundwater management area that has already huge elevated levels of nitrates in the water related to industrial ag and factory farms. In New Mexico, we're going to be working to pass a bill to amend the recently passed low carbon fuel standard program that, while it was meant to support clean energy, unfortunately, the incentives are there for dirty energy options like factory farm methane gas that would spur the increase in unsustainable factory farms, which are concentrated mostly in the southern part of the state of New Mexico. Again, talking more about the Midwest and out west in Iowa, where the political climate is much more difficult. We're also trying to pass a bill that would force large factory farms to have strong waste management plans to address the manure runoff that comes from these industrial scale farms in Iowa. And this is the next one I actually kind of wanted to talk about. We're also going to be working as part of a coalition in Iowa to stop a bill written by Bayer Monsanto lobbyists that gives legal immunity for pesticide manufacturers. I think we're also going to share an AP article on this. This is just pretty shocking, but the way they operate. This bill would revoke the right for individuals to sue pesticide manufacturers, particularly Bayer, the producer of glyphosate. It would revoke the right for individuals to sue these pesticide manufacturers for adverse health outcomes. Iowa has the second highest cancer rate in the nation and is the only state where the cancer rate continues to rise. This bill is actually being introduced in a lot of other states across the country as well. And we need to be vigilant because companies use this same playbook across different states to evade responsibility for the damage they do and the devastation they bring to families and communities. On water issues, we are also continuing to fight to ensure water access and affordability in places like Maryland, particularly in Maryland and Baltimore City, where I work. Last year, for instance, a Maryland bill sought to remove critical protections for low-income families against foreclosures and evictions for unpaid water bills. Food and Water Watch actually won these protections 6 years ago. I worked on that, our team worked on it, but lo and behold, the tax sale industry that is looking to get more properties in the Baltimore area is fighting to empower itself to foreclose against communities using unpaid water bills, and is actually shopping around legislation again for next year in 2025. So we'll be there to fight against that. We'll be fighting against water privatization in Pennsylvania and New Jersey, because we know water is a human right that is not a commodity to be owned by corporations who see water as a money-making endeavor. Our research, which we've done for decades now, has shown that privatization of water systems leads to higher bills, poorer quality service, and less accountability. So one of the ones we will be fighting is the Chester Water Authority in Pennsylvania, from a state-imposed privatization to a company called Aqua. So all of these campaigns that were started because people in their communities chose to fight back and devote time towards improving their communities a little at a time are ongoing. And we need people like you on this call to continue helping us with these campaigns, but also building out the issues in the communities where you live now that we may not currently know about. So I want to urge you, really urge you to plug into these networks by joining our volunteer network at Food and Water Watch. I know another colleague of mine is going to talk a little more in detail about this in a few minutes, but let me say that we're always looking for more people to help with these campaigns and always looking to take on projects that community members flag for us. The great thing about the volunteer network is that we always meet inspiring, dedicated people, and Food and Water Watch is a clearinghouse for trainings and tools to help organize and win victories that improve people's lives. I mentioned how important the network is right now because we need to expand our community networks as we prepare for our defense in 2025. In fact, this was kind of mentioned a little bit ago. There are very clear things to do now in the so-called lame duck session of Congress. Lame duck is the time in between November and the inauguration of the new Congress when a lot of things may fly under the radar because it has outgoing members of Congress, right, members who've lost or retired, and it also overlaps with the holidays. But this year is important because Biden will have a chance to solidify many of his achievements and cement real legal protections for those programs before he leaves office. So right now, here are a few things I wanted to highlight that Food and Water Watch is really demanding. The first is that Biden reject any outstanding liquefied natural gas permits as a way of putting the end to the expansion of more fossil fuels. We're going to share that email action right now on the chat. We're also asking that he ensures that money for good clean energy projects like wind, solar, storage, as well as a lot of funding for big drinking water and sewage projects that were appropriated via two big federal bills in the past 4 years. We really want Biden to make sure the money gets out the door into communities. Believe it or not, some of that money has yet to be sent. So we need those checks to go out as soon as possible before the projects get tabled by the new administration. Let me see. We're also hearing that Senator Manchin is again pushing a dirty deal to fast track oil and gas projects and infrastructure that would help those projects. And we need to make sure the Senate does not approve any of this at the last minute. So all of the background and actions you can take for these issues and more will be shared on the volunteer network calls that I am really hoping you will join tonight. We hold these calls regularly, so that's why it's important for you to really join up. So again, I want to thank you for all you do and for giving me a few minutes to feel re-energized from knowing so many of you are deliberating on what your small tech next step will be in these times ahead for us. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jorge. Yeah, this is where community comes in and we prove that people are power. When we come together, we make things happen. We are running a little behind time, so I'm actually going to move ahead and introduce our next speaker. Let's see, John Pope, let's get you out here. So I'd like to introduce you to Food and Water Watch donor and volunteer John Pope. John has been volunteering with Food and Water Watch since the successful campaign to ban fracking in New York State. He is currently active with Food and Water Watch on campaigns to pass the New York Heat Act, ban CO2 fracking, stop the Iroquois pipeline expansion, and to push back against attempts to water down important municipal emission regulations in New York City. John, thank you so much for being here. I invited you to speak tonight from the perspective of someone who has been very involved with Food and Water Watch, both as a donor and as a volunteer. I want to point out, though, that when I met you 2 days ago, I said to you that I'd heard your name from colleagues because you've been involved in a lot of food and water issues. And you corrected me and said, actually, you think of it as Food and Water Watch being involved in your issues. I thought that was such an important distinction. Can you describe what you meant by that?
Oh, sure. I said that partially tongue in cheek, but it's true. I align very much with Food and Water Watch mission. I grew up in upstate New York and uh, was involved with a farming family, small farming family, and the environment has always been incredibly important to me. So I've it dovetails nicely, and it also dovetails on the level like you can feel all these things and all these things are wrong and you can't do it alone. And I think as a volunteer, what Food and Water Watch really does for me is that it identifies the solution, it sticks to that solution uncompromisingly and lays out these steps that we can all plug into without having to do all the kind of gear spinning on our own. So it's a really good synergy.
John, I'm going to skip to our last question because of time. Can you tell us what is next for you as a volunteer and a donor?
Oh, sure. Well, I mean, I think it's been a underlying theme tonight. We're gonna need all the people we can get, and uh, so I think trying to invigorate volunteers and people in my life to get involved with the things we're doing here in New York State, and as a donor, really, we're not having the organizers, and we just heard from Jorge, and like what a powerful thing he was saying, and if that's where the rubber hits the road, is us funding these organizers that organize this people power that's just sitting out here waiting to be tapped. And so that's really where I'm hoping to go, push this rock back up this steep hill and keep on fighting. I mean, everybody says we've been here before, and it's true. And any of these battles are always an uphill battle, and they're long drawn out fights generally here in New York, and we stay through to the end. And
Thank you
there
so
you
much.
have
And
it.
thank you for all of the work that you do. Yeah, I appreciate you giving us your time tonight. And yeah, I just want to make one more plug for helping us out. If you would like to give a gift, we have the link in the chat. And again, we don't take any corporate money. It's all from your generosity. So thank you all for that. Thank you, John, for being here.
Sure.
I think I want to hear a little bit more about our volunteer network. So let's bring Thomas Meyer on. Thomas is our Strategic Organizing Projects Director, and we'll be talking a little bit about the volunteer network and ways that people on this call can get involved. So Thomas, let's hear what volunteers have been working on in the past few months, and what are you prepared to do in the coming new year?
Yeah, hey everyone. I'm gonna share my screen here just to share a few pictures. I see a lot of familiar names in the chat and the participants list, so good to have you all here tonight. A lot of what our volunteers have been working on, you heard from John and Jorge. It's a lot of outreach, especially over the summer and early fall. It's a great opportunity. We do a lot of tabling and petitioning at farmers markets. And public events, educational events. This was at a big farming festival up in New York. Always a great opportunity to meet people and give them an opportunity to take action. Like John said, a lot of people care about our issues. Certainly a majority of people in the US are concerned about food and water and know that that's really important. our job as organizers and volunteers and activists is to give them an opportunity to take action. And so that's a lot of what our volunteers and organizers do, especially over the summer when we can get outside and meet people where they're at. We're also doing trainings and developing our volunteer leaders. This was from a more intensive organizing strategy training we did in New Jersey. And like Jorge said, there was lots of opportunities for leadership at all different levels. And we're always thinking about how to give volunteers leadership in our campaigns and give them skills necessary to help win these important fights. I just want to share some of the highlights from the last year. Heard this a bit from Mitch and Tara and Jorge, but you know, at the end of the year, it's always good to kind of look back and reflect on what we've accomplished. Election years are always kind of tricky because as you get closer to the date, elected officials spend less time governing and more time campaigning. But we actually had some really important victories. So the Climate Superfund Act and the CO2 fracking bill that we passed in New York, we are still pushing. I saw somebody mention in the chat, still pushing for Governor Hochul to sign those before the end of the year. Post-election, between the end of the year is when we expect that she'll sign a lot of bills. So we're still pushing on that, but a big victory to get those out of the legislature. A years-long victory in New Jersey to stop a big gas power plant. We actually killed one power plant right at the end of 2023 and then another one at the beginning of 2024. So New Jersey team and volunteers and coalition partners doing tremendous work there. In California, as you probably all know, we've been fighting for many years to ban fracking there, in addition to the other states where we banned it, including New York and Maryland. New York is a very large oil and gas producing state, and the fracking ban went into effect in October. Governor Newsom finalized the regulations to do that. We will still be fighting to stop other forms of oil and gas drilling, but this is a huge victory in California that was many years in the making. And then a couple wins at the ballot box that were did not have anything to do with candidates, but two ballot measures. One in California, again, Proposition 4 approved $10 billion for climate and environmental projects, climate resiliency, helping to address clean water issues, prevent wildfires, things like that. So that was the voters of California really overwhelmingly saying that these issues are important to us and we're going to invest in it. And then again in New Jersey, Jorge mentioned our water fights, working to keep water under public control. The Gloucester Township residents voted overwhelmingly, I think like 70 or 80% to stop a proposed sale of their water system. So that's still a fight, especially in places like New Jersey and Pennsylvania. But we see very often that voters are opposed to those sales. Just with our last few minutes, some folks might have been on our volunteer network call that we had last week, a little more quick reaction to election results, and we had some good discussion about how folks were feeling after the election and what the next 4 years will hold. There's a really good article that an organizer and trainer, Daniel Hunter, wrote, 10 things to do if Trump wins, or now 10 things to do now that Trump has won. And I wanted to pull out 5, and we talked about these last week, but a lot of folks responded positively. So just at the end of the call, wanted to share these things because they've been really helpful for me and I think our other volunteers as we go into the tough fights ahead. So the first one is affirm that you have something to offer. Like John said, there are lots and lots of ways to get involved, but it is going to take us actually getting involved. So no one's going to come and rescue us from the situation that we're in. It will take all of us doing what we can. It might be big, it might be small, or something in between, but everybody has something to offer, and we can do that together. I want to get real about power. So we talk a lot about political power, people power, and under a democratic system, the will of the people matters first and foremost. Sometimes that's true in our country, sometimes it's not. We know that our democracy is very flawed. But we also know that Trump has been very, very clear about using his political power really to the fullest and not being shy or having any qualms about going after his political enemies, consolidating power in every way that he can, breaking norms and institutions that get in the way. So we need to be really clear about our power, kind of the quantity and quality of political power that we have, and the power that we don't have, and what we need to focus on building, the strategic places and people that we need to build with. And so, as part of the Food and Water Volunteer Network, we're always talking and thinking about how we're building power, how we're bringing more people into our campaigns and our movement. And so, yeah, just being really real about that is important for all of us to do. The next tip is to see the new political ecology. So what I mean by that, there's already sort of chaos at various levels and degrees now that Trump is in office. We see that, like Wenonah and others mentioned, with his cabinet appointments. Campaigns are sort of about promises and slogans and things like that. Governing is real, it's concrete, it's practical, and it's on a daily basis. And the kind of right wing, the MAGA universe is not actually in universal agreement. They all agree they wanted to support Trump, but when it comes down to the hard, brass tacks of governing, there will be sort of cracks in that movement, and it's up to us to be really strategic and figure out where we can, as Tara and Mitch and others alluded to, sort of exploit those divisions in our opponents and do everything we can to protect people and communities from the really harmful policies that they're pushing. So seeing our path in this kind of new political ecosystem is really important. The next one might be the most important, and others have alluded to this, but getting with your friends, your group, your people is absolutely critical. We cannot do this work alone. And I know my experience and others from 2016 and the first Trump term was that the people who kind of came out the other side in the best shape, physically, mentally, emotionally, were people who took action together, who were a part of a group, who were a part of a movement. And so as we look ahead, if you're not already there with us or with another group, then now's the perfect time to take that step. We hope that you'll join Food and Water Watch and our volunteer network. Lots of places and ways to get involved, but doing things together is really critical. And then the last thing, of course, is just to be ready for the long haul. All of this work is a marathon, not a sprint. And so getting caught up in every kind of outrageous thing that Trump does is probably not very healthy. Keeping our eyes on the long-term prize, the ways that we can have the most strategic impact is really important. And like others have mentioned, taking care of ourselves along the way. A good analogy is kind of thinking about it like a choir. You've seen a choir sustain a big, long note. People are actually taking breaks while others are singing. They're taking a deep breath, and while others hold the note, and then trade places. And so that can be our role. Sometimes we're singing as loud as we can. Sometimes we're taking a deep breath, and that's how we'll be in it for the long haul. And then lastly, just another plug again to join the Food and Water Volunteer Network. So kind of three big ways to do this. One is at the state or regional level. So we have organizers on the ground who convene at minimum monthly meetings, but also lots of other conversations and events and ways to get involved in the states you see on the screen there. So just really quickly, that's New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, California, Maryland, Iowa, Florida, New Mexico, Oregon. That's not in alphabetical or geographical order, but find the state. If you're in one of those states, connect with an organizer. We also have kind of national issue area teams, so food, water, climate, and plastics, and other ways to volunteer nationally, making phone calls, sending text messages, working with our organizers on campaigns both at the the state or local level and at the national level. So I think there's a link in the chat where you can find all of the upcoming events and meetings and contact with organizers to get involved. I know we're a few minutes over, but just wanted to say thank you again to everybody for being here tonight, and I hope you'll get involved.
Thank you, Thomas. Yeah, thank you all for all of the questions that you've sent throughout the evening. I know we didn't get to all of them, but I encourage you to check out our website to learn more about the work that we're doing. You may not know this, but we actually produce extensive research on all of the areas we work in. So I encourage you to visit our website and check out that research, and we'll put a link for that in the chat. Thank you all for joining me tonight. I'm really honored to be standing here talking to all of you. A special thanks to all of our speakers and everyone who has supported this event. I really appreciate it. Thank you all for being on this call, and I hope to keep seeing you here at these Livable Future Live events, starting with our next one, January 29th, with the author talk, and we have that link in the chat again, where we'll be talking with Austin Farrick about money, power, and corruption in America's food industry. I'm inspired by the number of people on this call. I'm inspired by the people we heard from today. As we've heard over the past hour, we can do big things when we build power with community, and we're all in this together. I encourage you to find a volunteer team near you or find an issue that calls to you and learn more about volunteering with Food and Water Watch, and we'll put a link again in the chat for that. And lastly, thank you to everyone who's made a gift this evening. As we've said earlier, we don't take corporate funding because we want to prioritize the health and communities of our planet. So your generosity really powers us forward. And lastly, we recorded today's conversation. So I will be emailing this out I will be emailing that recording out, and I'll also be emailing all of the resources that we shared. So you'll see those in your email tomorrow. Thank you again for being here, and I hope to see you all again soon.